Hi, this is Rock. We're going to look at if and if or. I've got some data here for houses for sale. We've got houses by square foot, number of bedrooms, number of bathrooms, and the cost in US dollars. Here in this column, looks like we've got 27 homes, and we want to put together a formula that tells us whether or not this particular set of criteria matches our requirements. And our requirements are up here across the top, where we have a minimum and a maximum for house square feet, the number of bedrooms, the bathrooms, and cost. What we want to make sure is that this formula will work no matter how we modify our requirements. It'll still give us a yes or a no. Actually, to make it easier to see the yeses, I'm just going to say yes or leave it blank. So let's do a formula here using if. And first we're going to look at the if and. So we're going to start with if, and then we're going to have, as the logical test, it's going to need to meet these criteria. So I'm going to start with and. I'm also going to open up this formula bar so that we can have multiple things in here in terms of my being able to hold Alt, hit Enter, and get on to a next line so that I can organize what I want to say here. We're going to set up some and statements so that we can see if the house per square foot size is equal to or greater than our minimum and less than or equal to our maximum. We've got 4 criteria which will be addressed by this and then the greater than or equal to the min and the less than or equal to the max will be addressed by the next and I'll show you how that works. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if this data for the house square footage is greater than or equal to our minimum, and I'm going to set that with absolute reference so that it stays on H4. And then my second argument in this and statement is going to be if H11 is less than or equal to the max, which is H5, and I'll make that also absolute as a reference. And now we're going to do our second and statement. It's really the third one here, but it's on our second criteria in terms of number of bedrooms. So we'll do the same thing here, clicking on I11 greater than or equal to I4, absolute reference, comma, Alt Enter, come back here, and then I11 is less than or equal to I5, absolute reference, and I'm going to close. I forgot to close the and up here. Sorry about that. There we go. So we have so far this first and its first logical is here, and its second logical is here. We're going to keep going and keep building so that we have 4 logicals within this first and, so that we have a logical determining whether or not we have the right number of bathrooms or whether the cost is in the right range. So we're going to keep going here. Alt Enter, come over here and say and we'll say J11 greater than or equal to J4. Hit F4 to make that an absolute reference. Alt Enter, J11 less than or equal to J5, F4 for absolute reference, close that parentheses, comma, Alt Enter, and now we're going to do this last one, and I'm going to show you how I actually do it. When I do this kind of thing, I usually just copy paste there. Then in this case, I would just change to K, so K instead of J, and now I can close that first and statement. Now that I've got the logical test put together, now I want to have the value if it's true. If it's true, in other words, if it meets all of my criteria, then I want it to say yes. And if it's not true, then I just want it to return a blank. I could say no, but it's harder to see a yes among a bunch of no's than it is to see a yes among a bunch of cells that are blank. I'm going to hit enter. This is a formula that's just for one cell. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll down and hit Control D to copy all these down. And now I've got 2 yeses. So 2 homes meet the criteria that I set here. I'm going to put in place a quick count if so that I don't have to scroll to see if I've got yeses in this. So I'm just going to select this range, put the yes in here. So that will count my yeses, and I've got 2 yeses here. All right. Now I can change my maximum to 5,000, and it's the same. So let's go up in cost. Let's say I now have in my budget 700,000, and it goes up to 3. I now have 3 yeses in here. So this is working, and that's how to nest and statements together. All right, now let's figure out how to do an or nested with an if. And let's use as our criteria, instead of just having the requirements, we'll have another criterion that we always want to have it say yes if, for example, let's say the house is larger than 3,500 square feet and it's less than $300,000. That can be a thing in addition to the requirements that we have for our ideal house, that if there's any house that meets those criteria, we want to include it. So what we need to do that is we can look at our and statements here. If all of these are true, then this is this and. But I want to have a separate and statement. So I'm going to have or in front of this. And then the first part of this or is all of this. And so I'm going to put in a comma. And now the second part of this or criteria, the second logical, will be if it meets the criteria of the house is larger than 3,500 square feet and is less than $300,000. So I'm going to say if this is greater than or equal to 3,500, and then this is less than or equal to 300,000. I'm going to close that and now I'm going to close the or statement, and that gives me 2 logicals inside this or. The first is if it meets our regular requirements, and the second is a test to see if it meets our, I got to take a look at this, if it's under 300K for something over or equal to 3,500 square feet. All right, now let's hit enter on that, copy that down. And now we have one that meets that criteria, which is this one, which is that there's 299K for a 3,624 square foot house. So this is the one that got added based on our new or function inside this nested if. So that's how to use the if function with nested or and functions. Next, we're going to look at the let function using a nested switch. See you then.